Hey, how's it going? So, we're going to read chapter 26 of Treasure Island from Robert Louis Stevenson. Israel Hands. The wind, serving us to a desire, now hauled into the west. We could run so much the easier from the northeast corner of the island to the mouth of the north inlets. Only as we had no power to anchor and dared not beach her till the tide had flown a good deal farther. Time hung on our hands. The coxswain told me how to lay the ship to after a good many trials. I succeeded, and we both sat in the silence over another meal. "Captain," said he at length with that same uncomfortable smile, "here's my old shipmate, O'Brien. Suppose you was to heave him overboard. I ain't particular as a rule, and I don't take no blame for settling his hash. But I don't reckon him ornamental now, do you? I'm not strong enough, and I don't like the job, and there he lies for me," said I. "This here's an unlucky ship, this Hispaniola, Jim," he went on blinking. "There's a power of men been killed in this Hispaniola, a sight o' poor seamen dead and gone since you and me took ship to Bristol. I never seen sich dirty luck, not I. There here O'Brien now. He's dead, ain't he? Well, now, I'm no scholar, and you're a lad as can see and figure, and put it straight. Do you take it as a dead man is dead for good, or do he come alive again? You can kill the body, Mr. Hands, but not the spirits." "You must know that already," I replied. "O'Brien there is in another world, and he may be watching us." "Ah," says he, "well, that's unfortunate. Appears as if killing parties was a waste of time. Howsomever, spirits don't reckon for much. But what I've seen, I'll chance it with the spirits, Jim. And now you've spoke up free, and I'll take it kind if you'd step down into that there cabin and get me a shiver me timbers. I can't hit the name on't. Well, you get me a bottle of wine, Jim. This here brandy's too strong for my head." Now the coxswain's hesitation seemed to be unnatural, and as for the notion of his preferring wine to brandy, I entirely disbelieved it. The whole story was a pretext. He wanted me to leave the deck. So much was plain. But with what purpose, I could in no way imagine. His eyes never met mine. They kept wandering to and fro, up and down, and now with a look to the sky, now with a flitting glance upon the dead O'Brien. All the time he kept smiling and putting his tongue out in the most guilty, embarrassed manner, so that a child could have told that he was bent on some deception. I was prompt with my answer, however, for I saw where my advantage lay, and that with a fellow so densely stupid, I could easily conceal my suspicions to the end. "Some wine?" I said. "Far better. Will you have white or red?" "Well, I reckon it's about the blessed same to me, shipmate," he replied. "So it's strong and plenty of it. What's the odds?" "All right," I answered. "I'll bring you port, Mr. Hands, but I'll have to dig for it. With that, I scuttled down the companion with all the noise I could, slipped off my shoes, ran quietly along the sparred gallery, mounted the forecastle ladder, and popped my head out of the fore companion. I knew he would not expect to see me there, yet I took every precaution possible, and certainly the worst of my suspicions proved true. He had risen from his position to his hands and knees, and though his leg obviously hurt him pretty sharply when he moved, for I could hear him stifle a groan, yet it was at a good rattling rate that he trailed himself across the deck. In half a minute he had reached the port scruppers and picked out a coil of rope, a long knife, or rather a short dirk. Discolored to the hilt with blood, he looked upon it for a moment, thrusting forth his underjaw, tried the point upon his hand, and then, hastily concealing it in the bosom of his jacket, trundled back again into his old place against the bulwark. This was all that I required to know. Israel could move about. He was now armed, and if he had been so much trouble to get rid of mine, it was plain that I was meant to be the victim. What he would do afterwards, whether he would try to crawl right across the island from North Inlet to the camp among the swamps, or whether he would fire Long Tom, thrusting that his own comrades might come first to help him, was, of course, more than I could say. Yet I felt sure that I could trust him in one point, since in that our interests jumped together, and that was the disposition of the schooner. We both desired to have her stranded safe enough in a sheltered place, and so that when the time came she could be got off again with a little labor and danger as might be. And until that was done, I considered that my life would certainly be spared. While I was thus turning the business over in my mind, I had not been idle with my body. I had stolen back to the cabin, slipped once more into my shoes, and laid my hand at random on a bottle of wine, and now, with this for an excuse, I made my reappearance on the deck. Hans lay as I had left him, all fallen together in a bundle, and with his eyelids lowered as though he were too weak to bear the light. He looked up, however, at my coming, knocked the neck off the bottle like a man who had done the same thing, and took a good swig, with his favorite toast of "Here's luck." Then he lay quiet for a little, and then, pulling out a stick of tobacco, begged me to cut him a quid. "Cut me a junco that," says he, "for I haven't no knife and hardly strength enough, so be as I had. Jim, I reckon I've missed days. Cut me a quid, as'll likely be the last, lad, for I'm for my long home, and no mistake." "Well," said I, "I'll cut you some tobacco. But if I was you, and thought myself so badly, I would go to my prayers like a Christian man." "Why?" said he. "Now, you tell me why." "Why?" he cried. "You were asking me just now about the dead. You've broken your trust. You've lived in sin and lies and blood. There is a man you killed lying at your feet at this moment. And you ask me why? For God's mercy, Mr. Hans, that's why." I spoke with a little heat. thinking of the bloody dirk he had hidden in his pocket and designed, in all his ill thoughts, to end me with. He, for his part, took a great draught of the wine and spoke with the most unusual solemnity. For 30 years, he said, I've sailed the seas and seen good and bad, better and worse, fair weather and foul, provisions running out, knives going, and whatnot. Well, now I tell you, I never seen good come, oh goodness, yet. Him a strikes first is my fancy. Dead men don't bite, them's my views. Amen, so be it. And now you look here, he added, suddenly changing his tone, we've had about enough of this foolery. The tide's made good enough by now. You just take my orders, Captain Hawkins, and we'll sail slap in and be done with it. All told, we had scarce 2 miles to run, but the navigation was delicate. The entrance to this northern anchorage was not only narrow and shoal, but lay east and west, so that the schooner must be nicely handled to be got in. I think I was good, prompt subaltern, and I am very sure that Hans was an excellent pilot. For we went about and dodged in, shaving the banks with an uncertainty and a neatness that were a pleasure to behold. Scarcely had we passed the heads before the land closed around us. The shores of North Inlet were as thickly wooded as those of the southern anchorage, but the space was longer and narrower and more like what in truth it was, the estuary of a river. Right now before us, at the southern end, we saw the wreck of a ship in the last stages of dilapidation. It had been a great vessel of 3 masts, but had lain so long exposed to the injuries of the weather that it was hung about with great weeds of dripping seaweed. And now on the deck of it, shore bushes had taken root and now flourished thick with flowers. It was a sad sight, but it showed us that the anchorage was calm. Now, said Hans, look here, there's a pet bit for the beach a ship in. Fine flat sand, never a cat's paw, trees all around of it, and flowers a-blowing like a garden on that old ship. And once breached, I inquired, how shall we get her off again? Why so? He replied, you take a line ashore there on the other side at low water, and take a turn about one of them big pines, bring it back, take a turn round the capstan, and lie to for the tide, come high water. All hands take a pull upon the line, and off she comes as sweet as nature. And now, boy, you stand by. We're near the bit now, and she's too much way on her. Starboard a little, so steady. Starboard, larboard a little, steady, steady. So he issued his commands, which I breathlessly obeyed, till all of a sudden he cried, now, my hearty luff, and I put the helm hard up, and the Hispaniola swung around rapidly and ran stem on the low wooded shore. The excitement of these last maneuvers had somewhat interfered with the watch I had kept hitherto. Sharply enough up the coxswain. Even then I was still too much interested, waiting for the ship to touch, that I quite forgot the peril that hung over my head, and stood craning over the starboard bulwarks and watching the ripples spreading wide before the bows. I have I might have fallen without a struggle for my life had not a sudden disquietude seized upon me and made me turn my head. Perhaps I had heard a creak, or seen his shadow moving with the tail of my eye. Perhaps it was an instinct like a cat's, but sure enough, when I looked round, there was Hans, already halfway towards me, with the dirk in his right hand. We must both have cried out aloud when our eyes met, but while mine was the shrill cry of terror, his was a roar of fury like a charging bull's. At that same instant, he threw himself forward, and I leapt sideways towards the bows. As I did so, I let go of the tiller, which sprang sharp to leeway, and I think this saved my life, for it struck Hans across the chest and stopped him, for the moment, dead. Before he could recover, I was safe out of the corner where he had trapped me, with all the deck to dodge about. Just for word of the mainmast, I stopped, drew a pistol from my pocket, took a cool aim, although he had already turned and was once more coming directly after me, and drew the trigger. The hammer fell, but there followed neither flash nor sound. The priming was useless as with seawater. I cursed myself for my neglect. Why had I not long before reprimed and reloaded my only weapons? Then I should not have been as now a mere fleeing sheep before this butcher. Wounded as he was, it was wonderful how fast he could move, his grizzled hair tumbling over his face, and his face itself was as red as a red ensign. With his haste and fury, I had no time to try my other pistol, nor indeed much inclination, for I was sure it would be useless. One thing I saw plainly, I must not simply retreat before him, or he would speedily hold me boxed into the bows. As a moment since he had so nearly boxed me in the stern, once so caught, had 9 or 10 inches of the blood-stained dirk, would be my last experience on the side of eternity. I placed my palms against the main mast, which was of a goodish bigness, and waited, every nerve upon the stretch. Seeing that I meant to dodge, he also paused, and a moment or two passed in feints on his part and corresponding movements upon mine. It was such a game as I had often played at home about the rocks of Black Hill Cove, but never before, you may be sure, with such a wildly beating heart as now. Still, as I say, it was a boy's game, and I thought I could hold my own at it against an elderly seaman with a wounded thigh. Indeed, my courage had begun to rise so high that I allowed myself a few darting thoughts on what would be the end of the affair. And while I saw certainly that I could spin it out for long, I saw no hope of any ultimate escape. Well, while things stood thus, suddenly the Hispaniola struck, staggered, ground for an instant in the sand, and then, swift as a blow, canted over to the port side till the deck stood at an angle of 45 degrees, and about a puncheon of water splashed into the scupper holes and lay in a pool between the deck and bulwark. We were both of us capsized in a second. and both of us rolled almost together into the scuppers, the dead red cap. With his arms still spread out, tumbling stiffly after us, so near were we. Indeed, that my head came against the coxswain's foot with a crack that made my teeth rattle. Blow and all, I was the first afoot again, for hands had got involved with the dead body. The sudden canting of the ship had made the deck no place for running on. I had to find some new way of escape, and that upon the instant, for my foe was almost touching me. Quick as thought, I sprang into the mizzen shrouds, rattled up hand over hand, and did not draw a breath till I was seated on the crosstrees. I had been saved by being prompt. The dirk had struck not half a foot below me as I pursued my upward flight, and there stood Israel Hands with his mouth open and his face upturned to mine, a perfect statue of surprise and disappointment. Now that I had a moment to myself, I lost no time in changing the priming of my pistol, and then, having one ready for service, and to make assurance doubly sure, I proceeded to draw the load of the other and recharge it afresh from the beginning. My new employment struck Hands all of a heap. He began to see the dice going against him, and after an obvious hesitation, he also hauled himself heavily into the shrouds, and with the dirk of his teeth began slowly and painfully to mount. It cost him no end of time and groans to haul his wounded leg behind him, and I had quietly finished my arrangements before he was much more than a third of the way up. Then, with a pistol in either hand, I addressed him. "One more step, Mr. Hands," said I, "and I'll blow your brains out. Dead men don't bite, you know," I added with a chuckle. He stopped instantly. I could see by the working of his face that he was trying to think, and the process was so slow and laborious that, in my newfound security, I laughed aloud. At last, with a swallow or two, he spoke, his face still wearing the same expression of extreme perplexity. In order to speak, he had to take the dagger from his mouth, but in all else he remained unmoved. "Jim," says he, "I reckon we're fouled. You and me, and we'll have to sign articles. I'd have you but for that here lurch. But I don't have no luck, not I, and I reckon I'll have to strike, but which comes hard, you see, for a master mariner to a ship's younker like you, Jim." I was drinking in his words and smiling away, as conceited as a cock upon a wall, when, all in a breath, back went his right over his shoulder. Something sang like an arrow through the air. I felt a blow and then a sharp pang, and there I was pinned by the shoulder to the mast. In the horrid pain and surprise of the moment, I scarce can say it was by my own volition, and I am sure it was without a conscious aim. Both my pistols went off, and both escaped out of my hands. They did not fall alone. With a choked cry, the coxswain loosed his grasp upon the shrouds and plunged head first into the water. Chapter 27. Pieces of 8. Owing to the cant of the vessel, the mast hung far out over the water, and from my perch on the cross trees, I had nothing below me but the surface of the bay. Hans, who was not so far up, was in conscience nearer to the ship and fell between me and the bulwarks. He rose once on the to the surface in a lather of foam and blood, and then sank again for good. As the water settled, I could see him lying huddled together on the clean, bright sand in the shadow of the vessel's sides. A fish or two whipped past his body. Sometimes, by the quivering of the water, he appeared to move a little, as if he were trying to rise, but he was dead enough, for all that, being both shot and drowned, and was food for fish in the very place where he had designed my slaughter. I was no sooner certain of this than I began to feel sick, faint, and terrified. The hot blood was running over my back and chest. The dirk, where it had pinned my shoulder to the mast, seemed to burn like a hot iron. Yet it was not so much these real sufferings that distressed me, for these, it seemed to me, I could bear without a murmur. It was the horror I had upon my mind of falling from the cross trees into the still green water, beside the body of the coxswain. I clung with both hands till my nails ached, and I shut my eyes as if to cover up the peril. Gradually, my mind came back again. My pulses quieted down to a mere natural time, and I was once more in possession of myself. It was my first thought to pluck forth the dirk, but either it was stuck too hard or my nerve failed me. I desisted with a violent shudder. Oddly enough, that very shudder did the business. The knife, in fact, had come the nearest in the world to missing me altogether. It held me by a mere pinch of skin, and this the shudder tore away. The blood ran down the faster, to be sure, but I was my own master again, and only tacked to the mast by my coat and shirt. These last I broke through with a sudden jerk, and then regained the deck by the starboard shrouds. For nothing in the world would I have again ventured, shaken as I was upon the overhanging port shrouds from which Israel had so lately fallen. I went below and did what I could for my wound. It pained me a good deal and still bled freely, but it was neither deep nor dangerous, nor did it greatly gall me when I used my arm. Then I looked around me, and as the ship was now, in a sense, my own, I began to think of clearing it from its last passenger, the dead man O'Brien. He had pitched, as I have said, against the bulwarks, where he lay like some horrible, ungainly sort of puppet, life-sized indeed, but how different from life's color or happiness, or life's comeliness. In that position, I could easily have my way with him, and as the habit of tragical adventures had worn off almost all my terror for the dead, I took him by the waist as if he had been a sack of bran, and with one good heave tumbled him overboard. He went in with a sounding plunge, the red cap came off and remained floating on the surface. And as soon as the splash subsided, I could see him and Israel lying side by side, both wavering with the tremulous movement of the water. O'Brien, though still quite a young man, was very bald. There he lay with that bald head across the knees of the man who had killed him, and the quick fishes steering to and fro over both. I was now alone upon the ship. The tide had just turned. The sun was within so few degrees of setting that already the shadow of the pines upon the western shore began to reach right across the anchorage and fall in patterns on the deck. And evening breeze had sprung up. And though it was well ward off by the hill with the two peaks through upon the east, the cordage had begun to sing a little softly to itself, and the idle sails to rattle to and fro. I began to see a danger to the ship. The jibs I speedily doused and brought tumbling to the deck, but the mainsail was a harder matter. Of course, when the schooner canted over, the boom had swung outboard, and the cap of it and a foot or two of sail hung even under water. I thought this made it more dangerous. Yet the strain was so heavy that I had feared to meddle. At last I got my knife and cut the halyards. The peak dropped instantly. A great belly of loose canvases floated abroad upon the water, and since pulled as I liked, I could not budge the down haul. That was the extent of what I could accomplish. For the rest, the Hispaniola must trust to luck like myself. By this time, the whole anchorage had fallen into shadow. The last rays, I remember, falling through a glade of wood and shining bright as jewels on the flowery mantle of the wreck. It began to be chill. The tide was rapidly fleeing seaward. The schooner settled more and more on her beam ends. I scrambled forward and looked over. It seemed shallow enough, and holding the cut hawser in both hands for a last security, I let myself drop softly overboard. The water scarcely reached my waist. The sand was firm and covered with ripple marks, and I waded ashore in great spirits, leaving the Hispaniola on her side, with her mainsail trailing wide upon the surface of the bay. About the same time, the sun went fairly down, and the breeze whistled low in the dusk among the tossing pines. At last, I was off the sea, nor had I returned thence empty-handed. There lay the schooner, clear at last from buccaneers and ready for our own men to board and get to sea again. I had nothing nearer my fancy than to get home to the stockade and boast of my achievements. Possibly I might be blamed a bit for my truantry, but the recapture of the Hispaniola was a clenching answer, and I hoped that even Captain Smollett would confess I had not lost my time. So, thinking in famous spirits, I began to set my face homeward for the blockhouse and my companions. I remembered that the most easterly of the rivers which drain into Captain Kidd's anchorage ran from the Two Peak Hill upon my left, and I bent my course in that direction that might pass the left while it was small. The wood was pretty open and keeping along the lower spurs. I had soon turned the corner of that hill, and not long after waded to the mid-calf across the watercourse. This brought me near to where I had encountered Ben Gunn, the maroon, and I walked more circumspectly, keeping an eye on every side. The dusk had come nigh hand completely, and I opened out the cleft between the two peaks. I became aware of a wavering glow against the sky, where, as I judged, the man of the island was cooking his supper before a roaring fire. And yet I wondered in my heart that he should show himself so careless. For if I could see this radiance, might it not reach the eyes of Silver himself, where he camped upon the shore among the marshes? Gradually the night fell blacker. It was all I could do to guide myself, even roughly, towards my destination. And the double hill behind me and the spyglass on my right looms faint and fainter. The stars were few and pale, and in the low ground where I wandered, I kept tripping among bushes and rolling into sandy pits. Suddenly, a kind of brightness fell about me. I looked up. A pale glimmer of moonbeams had alighted on the summit of the spyglass, and soon after I saw something broad and silvery moving low down behind the trees, and knew the moon had risen. With this to help me, I passed rapidly over what remained to me of my journey, and sometimes walking, sometimes running, impatiently drew near to the stockade. Yet as I began to thread the groove that lies before it, I was not so thoughtless but that I slacked my pace and went a trifle warily. It would have been a poor end of my adventures to get shot down by my own party in mistake. The moon was climbing higher and higher. Its light began to fall here and there in masses through the more open districts of the wood, and right in front of me a glow of a different color appeared among the trees. It was red and hot, and now and again it was a little darkened, as it were the embers of a bonfire smoldering. For the life of me, I could not think what it might be. At last, I came right down upon the borders of the clearing. The western end was already steeped in moonshine. The rest, and the blockhouse itself, still lay in a black shadow checkered with long silvery streaks of light. On the other side of the house, an immense fire had burned itself into clear embers and shed a steady red reverberation, contrasted strongly with the mellow paleness of the moon. There was not a soul stirring, nor a sound beside the noises of the breeze. I stopped, with much wonder in my heart, and perhaps a little terror also. It had not been our way to build great fires. We were, indeed, by the captain's orders, somewhat niggardly of firewood, and I began to fear that something had gone wrong while I was absent. I stole round by the eastern end, keeping close in shadow, and at a convenient place where the darkness was thickest, crossed the palisade. To make assurance surer, I got upon my hands and knees and crawled, without a sound, toward the corner of the house. As I drew nearer, my heart was suddenly and greatly lightened. It was not a pleasant noise in itself, and I often complained of it at other times. But just then it was like music to my to hear my friends snoring together so loud and peaceful in their sleep. The sea cry of the watch, that beautiful all's well, never fell more reassuring on my ear. In the meantime, there was no doubt of one thing. They kept an infamous bad watch. If it had been Silver and his lads that were now creeping in on them, not a soul would have seen daybreak. That was what it was. Though, thought I, to have the captain wounded, and again I blamed myself sharply for leaving them in that danger with so few to mount guard. By this time I had got to the door and stood up. All was dark within, so that I could distinguish nothing by the eye. As for sounds, there was the steady drone of the snorers, with a small occasional noise, a flickering or pecking that I could in no way account for. With my arms before me, I walked steadily in. I should lie down in my own place, I thought with a silent chuckle, and enjoy their faces when they found me in the morning. My foot struck something yielding. It was a sleeper's leg, and he turned and groaned, but without awakening. And then, all of a sudden, a shrill voice broke forth out of the darkness. Pieces of 8, 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 and so forth, without pause or change, like the clacking of a tiny mill. Silver's green parrot, Captain Flint's. It was she whom I have heard pecking at the piece of bark. It was she keeping better watch than any human being who thus announced my arrival with her wearisome refrain. I had no time left me to recover. At the sharp clipping tone of the parrot, the sleepers awoke and sprang up, and with a mighty oath the voice of Silver cried, "Who goes?" I turned to run, struck violently against one person, recoiled, and ran full into the arms of the second, who for his part closed upon and held me tight. "Bring a torch, Dick," said Silver when my capture was thus assured, and one of the men left the log house and presently returned with a lighted brand. Part 6. Captain Silver. Chapter 28. XXVIII. So, 28. In the enemy's camp. The red glare of the torch lighting up the interior of the blockhouse showed me the worst of my apprehensions realized. The pirates were in possession of the house and stores. There was the cask of cognac. There was the pork and bread, as before, and what tenfold increased my horror, not a sign of any prisoner. I could only judge that all had perished, and my heart smote me sorely that I had not been there to perish with them. There were 6 of the buccaneers. All told, not another man was left alive. 5 of them were on their feet, flushed and swollen, suddenly called out of the first step of drunkenness. The 6th had only risen upon his elbow. He was deadly pale, and the blood-stained bandage round his head told that he had recently been wounded, and still more recently dressed. I remembered the man who had been shot and had run back among the woods in the great attack, and doubted not that this was he. The parrot sat, preening her plumage, or on Long John's shoulder. He himself, I thought, looked somewhat paler and more stern than I was used to. He still wore the fine broadcloth suit in which he had fulfilled his mission, but it was bitterly the worse for wear, daubed with clay and torn with the sharp briars of the wood. So, said he, here is Jim Hawkins, shiver me timbers. Dropped in, like, eh? Well, come, I take that friendly. And thereupon he sat down across the brandy cask and began to fill a pipe. Give me a loan of the link, Dick, said he, and then when he had a good light, that'll do, lad, he added. Stick to Glim in the wood heap, and you, gentlemen, bring yourselves to. You needn't stand up for Mr. Hawkins. He'll excuse you. You may lay to that. And so, Jim, stopping the tobacco, here you were, and quite a pleasant surprise for poor old John. I see you were smart when first I set my eyes on you. But this here gets away from me clean. It do? To all this, as may be well supposed, I made no answer. They had set me with my back against the wall, and I stood there, looking Silver in the face, pluckily enough, I hope, to all outward appearance, but with black despair in my heart. Silver took a whiff or two of his pipe with great composure, and then ran on again. Now you see, Jim, so be as you are here, says he. I'll give you a piece of my mind. I've always liked you. I have, for a lad of spirits, and the picture of my own self when I was young and handsome. I always wanted you to join and take your share, and die a gentleman. And now, my cock, you've got to. Captain Smollet's a fine seaman, as I'll own up to any day, but stiff on discipline. Duty is duty, says he, and right he is. Just you keep clear of the captain. The doctor himself is gone dead again. You ungrateful scamp, was what he said, and the short and long of the whole story is about here. You can't go back to your own lot, for they won't have you, and without you start a third ship's company all by yourself, which might be lonely. You'll have to join with Captain Silver. So far, so good, my friends. Then we're still alive, and though I partly believe the truth of Silver's statement that the captain party were incensed at me for my desertion, I was more relieved than distressed by what I heard. I don't say nothing as to your being in our hands, continued Silver, though there you are, and you may lay to it. I'm all for argument. I never seen good come out o' threatening. If you like the service, well, you'll join, and if you don't, Jim, why, you're free to answer to, free and welcome, shipmate, and it fairer can be said by mortal seamen. Shiver my sides. Am I to answer then? I asked with a very tremulous voice. Though all this sneering talk, I was made to feel the threats of death that overhung me, and my cheeks burned and my heart beat painfully in my breast. Lad, said Silver, no one's oppressing you. Take your bearings. None of us won't hurry you, mate. Time goes so pleasantly in your company, you see. Well, says I, growing a bit bolder, if I'm to choose, I declare I have a right to know what's what. and why you're here, and where my friends are. What's what? Repeated one of the buccaneers in a deep growl. Ah, you'll be lucky one as knowed that. You'll perhaps batten down your hatch till you're spoke to, my friend, cried Silver truculently to this speaker, and then, in his first gracious tones, he replied to me. Yesterday morning, Mr. Hawkins, said he, in the dog watch, in the dog watch, down came Dr. Livesey with a flag of truce. Says he, Captain Silver, you're sold out. Ship's gone. Maybe we'd been taking a glass and a song to help it round. I won't say no. Leastways, none of us had looked out. We looked out, and by thunder, the old ship was gone. I never seen a pack of fools look fishier, and you may lay to that. If I tells you what looked the fishiest, well, says the doctor, let's bargain. We bargained, him and I, and here we are. Stores, brandy, blockhouse, and firewood. You was thoughtful enough to cut, and in a manner of speaking, the whole blessed boat from Cross Trees to Kelson. As for them, they've tramped. I do not know where they are. He drew again quietly at his pipe. And lest you should take it into the head of yours, he went on, that you was included in the treaty. Here's the last word that was said. How many are you? Says I, to leave. 4, says he. 4 and one of us wounded. As for the boy, I don't know where he is. Confound him, says he. Nor I don't much care. We're about sick of him. These was his words. Is that all? I asked. Well, it's all that you're to hear, my son, returned Silver. And now am I to choose? And now you are to choose, and you may lay to that, said Silver. Well, said I am not such a fool, but I know pretty well what I have to look for. Let the worst come to the worst. It's little I care. I've seen too many die since I fell in with you. But here's a thing or two I have to tell you, I said, and by this time I was quite excited. And the first is this. Here you are, in a bad way. Ship lost, treasure lost, men lost, your whole business gone in a week. And if you want to know who did it, it was I. I was in the apple barrel the night we sighted land. And I heard you, John, and you, Dick Johnson, in Hans, who is now at the bottom of the sea. And every word you said before the hour was out. And as for the schooner, it was I who cut her table, and it was I that killed the men you had aboard of her, and it was I who brought her where you'll never see her more, not one of you. The laugh's on my side. I've had the top of this business from the first. I no more fear you than I fear a fly. Kill me, if you please, or spare me. But one thing I'll say, and no more. If you spare me, bygones are bygones. And when my fellows are in court for privacy, I'll save you all I can. It is for you to choose. Kill another and do yourselves no good, or spare me and keep witness to save you from the gallows. I stopped, for I tell you, I was out of breath. And to my wonder, not a man of them moved, but all sat staring at me like many sheep, and while they were still staring, I broke out again. "And now, Mr. Silver," I said, "I believe you're the best man here, and if things go to the worst, I'll take it kind of you to let the door know the way I took it." "I'll bear that in mind," said Silver, with an accent so curious that I could not, for the life of me, decide whether he was laughing at my request or had been favorably affected by my courage. "I'll put one to that," cried the old mahogany-faced seaman, Morgan my name, whom I have seen in Long John's public house upon the quays of Bristol. It was him, that known black dog. "Well, and see here," added the sea cook, "I'll put another again to that. By thunder!" For it was the same boy that faked the chart from Billy Bones. First and last, we've split upon Jim Hawkins. "There he goes," said Morgan with an oath, and he sprang up, drawing his knife as if he had been 20. "Avast! There!" cried Silver. "Who are you? Tom Morgan? Maybe you thought you were this captain here. Perhaps, by the powers. But I'll teach you better. Cross me, and you'll go where many a good man's gone before you. First and last, these 30 years back. Some to the yard arm, shiver me timbers, and some by the board, and all to feed the fishes. Here's never a man looked me between the eyes and seen a good day's afterwards. Tom Morgan, you may lay to that." Morgan paused, but a hoarse murmur rose from the others. "Tom's right," said one. "I stood hazing long enough from one," said another. "I'll be hanged if I'll be hazed by you, John Silver. Did any of you gentlemen want to have it out with me?" roared Silver, bending far forward from his position on the keg with his pipe still glowing in his right hand. "Put a name on what you're at. You ain't dumb, I reckon. Him that wants shall get it. I have lived this many years, and a son of a rum puncheon cock his hat athwart my hoss at the latter end of it. You know the way. You're all gentlemen o' fortune, by your account. Well, I'm ready. Take a cutlass. Him that dares, and I'll see the color of his inside, crutch and all, before the pipe's empty." Not a man stirred, not a man answered. "What's your sort, is it?" he added, returning his pipe to his mouth. "Well, you're not gay lots. Well, you're a gay lots to look at. Anyway, not much worth to fight, you ain't. Perhaps you can understand King George's English. I'm captain here by 'lection. I'm captain here because I'm the best man by a long sea mile. You won't fight, as gentlemen o' fortune should. Then, by thunder, you'll obey, and you may lay to it. I like that boy. Now, I never seen a better boy than that. He was more a man than any pair of rats of you in this here house. And what I say is this. Let me see him that'll lay a hand on him. That's what I say, and you may lay to it." There was a long pause after this. I stood strange up against the wall, with my heart still going like a sledgehammer, but with a ray of hope now shining in my bosom. Silver leant back against the wall, his arms crossed, his pipe in the corner of his mouth, as calm as though he had been in church. Yet his eye kept wandering furtively, and he kept the tail of it on his unruly followers. They, on their part, drew gradually together towards the end of the blockhouse, and the low hiss of their whispering sounded in my ear continuously, like a stream. One after another, they would look up, and the red light of the torch would fall for a second on their nervous faces. But it were not towards me, it was towards Silver that they turned their eyes. You seem to have a lot of say, remarked Silver, spitting far into the air. Pipe up and let me hear it. Or lay to. Ask your problem, sir, returned one of the men. You're pretty free with some of the rules. Maybe you'll kindly keep an eye upon the rest. This crew's dissatisfied. This crew don't value bullying more than spike. This crew has its right like other crews. I'll make so free as that. And by your own rules, I take it we can talk together. I ask your pardon, sir, acknowledging you for the captaining at this presence, but I claim my right, and steps outside for a council. And with an elaborate sea salute, this fellow, a long, ill-looking, yellow-eyed man of 35, stepped coolly towards the door and disappeared out of the house. One after another, the rest followed his example, each making a salute as he passed, each adding some apology. According to rules, said one. Forecastle council, said Morgan. And so, with one remark or another, all marched out and left Silver and me alone with the torch. The sea cook instantly removed his pipe. Now, look you here, Jim Hawkins, he said in a steady whisper that was no more than audible. You're within half a plank of death. And what's a long sight worse of torture? They're going to throw me off. But, you mark, I stand by you through thick and thin. I didn't mean to. No, not till you spoke up. I was about desperate to lose that much blunt and be hanged into the bargain. But I see you was the right sort. I says to myself, you stand by Hawkins. John and Hawkins'll stand by you. You're his last card. And by living under by the living thunder, John, he's yours. Back to back, says I, you save your witness, and he'll save your neck. I began dimly to understand. You mean all's lost? I asked. Aye, by gum, I do, he answered. Ship gone, neck gone, that's the size of it. Once I looked into the bay, Jim Hawkins, and see no schooner. Well, I'm tough, but I gave out. As for that lot and their council, mark me, they're outright fools and cowards. I'll save your life, if so be as I can, from them. But see here, Jim, tit for tat. You save Long John from swinging. I was bewildered. It seemed a thing so helpless. He was asking, he, the old buccaneer, the ringleader throughout, what I can do. That I'll do, I said. It's a bargain, cried Long John. You speak up pluckily, and by thunder, I'll have a chance. He hobbled to the torch, where it stood propped among the firewood, and took a fresh light to his pipe. Understand me, Jim, he said, returning. I've a head on my shoulders, I have. I'm on Squire's side now. I know you've got that ship safe somewheres. How you done it, I don't know, but safe it is. I guess Hans and O'Brien turned soft. I never believed in neither of them. Now you mark me. I ask no questions, nor I won't let others. I know when a game's up, I do. And I know a lad that's staunch. Ah, you that's young. You and me might have done a power of good together. He drew some cognac from the cask into a thin cannikin. Will you taste, messmate? He asked, and when I refused, well, I'll take a drain myself, Jim, said he. I need a caulker. For there's trouble on hand. And talking of trouble, why did that doctor give me the chart, Jim? My face expressed a wonder so unaffected that he saw the neediness of further questions. Ah, well, he did, though, said he, and there's something under that, no doubt. Something surely under that, Jim, bad or good. And he took another swallow of the brandy, shaking his great fair head like a man who looks forward to the worst. And that concludes chapter 28.